Did the civil rights movement really achieve its dream? Segregation may be gone, but inequality still shapes Black communities in America today. From schools to justice to economic opportunity, the fight for true equality is far from over, and the story is still unfolding. Welcome back to Black Voice USA, where we explore the stories, struggles, and victories of Black communities across America. Today, we're diving into the civil rights movement, what it achieved, what still remains, and why the fight for true equality is far from over. They say the civil rights movement changed everything. They say America is a different place now, that segregation is over, that equality has finally been achieved. But the question is, has it really? When we look beyond the speeches, beyond the laws, and beyond the promises, we find that something is still missing. And that's the truth we need to face today. Because if we don't ask these hard questions, the dream that so many fought and died for may remain just that, a dream. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s shook America to its core. Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama, was not just an act of defiance. It was a symbol that Black people were no longer willing to accept injustice quietly. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speeches, particularly his famous "I Have a Dream," were not merely inspiring words. They were a vision that challenged a nation to live up to its own ideals. Malcolm X, with his powerful insistence on self-respect and self-determination, reminded the world that justice sometimes requires confrontation. And behind these famous names were thousands of unknown activists, marchers, and everyday citizens who risked their lives, endured beatings, and faced imprisonment simply for demanding what should have been their basic human rights. These brave individuals forced the nation to confront its moral and political failings. Laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were historic achievements that outlawed segregation and racial discrimination in voting, schools, and workplaces. They were victories hard-won through years of struggle, sacrifice, and sheer determination. But even as these legal victories were celebrated, they could not erase centuries of systemic oppression. Laws change on paper, but the deep-seated attitudes and social structures that perpetuate inequality often take generations to shift. The struggle for civil rights did not magically solve the economic, social, and political disparities that had been built over hundreds of years. Even today, the echoes of these inequalities are visible everywhere. In many Black neighborhoods across America, public schools remain significantly underfunded compared to schools in predominantly white areas. This lack of funding translates into larger class sizes, outdated textbooks, fewer extracurricular opportunities, and limited access to technology and resources. The consequences of this underinvestment are profound, as education is the foundation upon which economic mobility and personal empowerment are built. Children in these communities are often forced to fight harder just to reach the same opportunities available to others, perpetuating a cycle of inequality. Housing is another area where the legacy of segregation is painfully clear. Redlining, a practice where banks and government institutions systematically denied loans to Black families, created long-term economic disparities. Even decades after redlining was officially outlawed, its effects linger. Black families are more likely to live in neighborhoods with fewer resources, lower property values, and higher exposure to environmental hazards. This systemic exclusion has created a cycle where wealth accumulation and generational economic security are far harder to achieve. The labor market also reflects persistent inequities. Studies consistently show that Black workers, even those with the same qualifications as their white counterparts, often earn less and face more barriers to career advancement. Discrimination in hiring, promotion, and pay continues to affect millions, demonstrating that legal equality does not automatically translate into real-world equality. The criminal justice system reveals another harsh reality. Despite representing roughly 13% of the U.S. population, Black Americans make up a disproportionately large percentage of those incarcerated. Policies such as the war on drugs and mandatory minimum sentencing have disproportionately targeted Black communities, contributing to mass incarceration and the destabilization of families. Generations of Black men and women have been removed from their communities, leaving behind children growing up without parental support and perpetuating cycles of poverty and marginalization. Healthcare disparities further illustrate how incomplete the progress has been. Black Americans are more likely to experience chronic health conditions, higher infant mortality rates, and lower access to quality care. Social determinants of health, such as economic status, housing, education, and environmental factors, disproportionately impact Black communities. These disparities were particularly highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic, when Black Americans experienced higher rates of infection and death, revealing that systemic inequities remain deeply entrenched. What this shows is that the civil rights movement accomplished incredible things. It changed laws, altered public perception, and inspired generations, but it did not finish the work. The fight for equality is not a one-time event. It is ongoing, evolving, and multifaceted. Today's Black communities face challenges that are rooted in history, yet manifest in contemporary social, economic, and political structures. Even culturally, there are gaps. Media representation often skews towards stereotypes rather than authentic portrayals. Black voices and stories are frequently marginalized, misrepresented, or commodified for entertainment, while the lived realities of systemic struggles are ignored. True cultural recognition and empowerment are still works in progress, and until these narratives are fully embraced, society will remain incomplete in its understanding of equality. Education, housing, economic opportunity, criminal justice, healthcare, and culture. All these areas show that the dream of the civil rights movement is only partially fulfilled. The victories of the past are milestones, not endpoints. The activism, courage, and vision that define the civil rights movement still matter today because they remind us that change is possible, but only if the fight continues. And so the question remains, are we, as a society, ready to confront these ongoing inequalities with the same courage, commitment, and urgency as the activists of the past? Or will we allow their sacrifices to become mere history lessons, celebrated in textbooks but ignored in practice? The story of Black America is still being written, and every action or inaction shapes the next chapter. The legacy of the civil rights movement is not just in the laws that were passed or the marches that made history. It is in the ongoing struggle for justice, the resilience of communities, and the unwavering belief that a better, fairer society is possible. And understanding this legacy fully requires looking honestly at what has been achieved, what has been promised, and what is still missing. The fight for civil rights did not end in the 1960s. It transformed, shifted, and continues today. And as we explore the current state of Black civil rights, we must ask ourselves, are we building on the movement's victories, or are we letting progress stall? The answer will define the lives of millions today and the future generations to come. Decades after the landmark victories of the civil rights movement, the question remains, how much has truly changed? On paper, laws protect Black Americans from overt discrimination, but in practice, inequality persists in ways that are less visible but just as harmful. Schools in many Black communities continue to be underfunded, with overcrowded classrooms, outdated materials, and limited access to technology. Teachers are overworked, resources are scarce, and students often face barriers to achieving their full potential. Education was always a cornerstone of the civil rights movement, and yet today, access to quality education remains a privilege rather than a right for many Black children. Economic inequality is another glaring issue. Black households continue to have significantly less wealth than white households, a disparity rooted in historical policies such as redlining, employment discrimination, and limited access to higher-paying jobs. Even when Black individuals achieve higher education degrees or professional qualifications, wage gaps remain. The legacy of systemic exclusion continues to shape the economic realities of Black communities, limiting access to homeownership, business opportunities, and generational wealth. The justice system further illustrates the gaps that remain. Despite reforms, Black Americans are still disproportionately targeted by law enforcement. Stop-and-frisk policies, over-policing in certain neighborhoods, and harsher sentencing for similar offenses all contribute to mass incarceration. The social cost is immense. Families are disrupted, communities destabilized, and opportunities for social mobility reduced. The cycle of poverty, criminalization, and marginalization continues, proving that legal victories alone cannot ensure true equality. Healthcare disparities also remain a major concern. Black Americans are more likely to face chronic illnesses such as hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease. Infant mortality rates are higher in Black communities, and access to quality care is often limited by socioeconomic factors and systemic bias. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed these inequalities dramatically as Black individuals faced higher rates of infection, hospitalization, and death. These realities are a stark reminder that civil rights are not just about legal protections, they are about the ability to live a healthy, safe, and dignified life. Cultural representation is another area where progress has been inconsistent. While there has been improvement in media, entertainment, and politics, many Black voices are still marginalized. Stories of struggle, resilience, and achievement are often overshadowed by stereotypes or commercialized for mass consumption. Representation without power is incomplete. True equality requires both visibility and influence, ensuring that Black perspectives shape the narratives that affect society at large. Yet, despite these challenges, hope persists. Activism continues in modern forms. Protests, social media campaigns, and community organizations are raising awareness and demanding accountability. Movements like Black Lives Matter have rekindled the urgency of civil rights, highlighting police brutality, systemic injustice, and the need for comprehensive reform. Young activists are building on the legacy of the past, reminding the world that the fight for justice never ends. However, the struggle comes with challenges. Activists face opposition, fatigue, and sometimes violence. Progress can feel slow, and setbacks are frequent. But every protest, every conversation, every act of courage contributes to a larger movement. It is a continuation of a story that began over half a century ago, a story of resilience, determination, and unwavering belief in justice. So what is truly missing today? It is accountability, systemic change, and genuine opportunity. True civil rights mean more than the absence of overt discrimination. They require equity in education, healthcare, housing, employment, and representation. They require a society that recognizes the humanity of Black individuals in every sphere of life, where opportunities are not determined by the color of one's skin or the neighborhood they were born into. Until this vision is fully realized, the dream of the civil rights movement remains unfinished. The responsibility does not lie solely with Black communities. It lies with all of society. To honor the legacy of those who marched, protested, and sacrificed, everyone must confront uncomfortable truths, challenge systems of inequality, and actively work toward change. Silence and complacency are not neutral. They allow injustice to persist. Every action, from education to policy reform to cultural awareness, contributes to building the America envisioned by the civil rights movement. As we reflect on these ongoing challenges, it is clear that the journey is far from over. The victories of the past provide a foundation, but the work ahead is about fulfilling promises that remain unmet. Black communities continue to fight for justice, equity, and dignity, carrying forward the torch lit by their ancestors. And the question remains, will the next generations inherit a society where these dreams are fully realized, or will they face the same struggles as those before them? The civil rights movement was never meant to be a moment frozen in time. It was a beginning, a spark to ignite change. Today, that spark still burns, demanding attention, action, and unwavering commitment. The path forward is not easy, but the stakes are too high to turn away. Equality is not optional. It is a moral imperative, a societal responsibility, and a test of our collective conscience. As we close this chapter, remember this: the fight for Black civil rights is not just history, it is living, evolving, and urgent. Each of us has a role to play, whether by speaking out against injustice, supporting reforms, or simply acknowledging the truth of what remains unfinished. The dream lives on, but it will only be complete when action meets intention and equality is realized in the lives of every Black American. The story of the Black civil rights movement is far from over. It is a living struggle, a fight that continues in every classroom, every courtroom, every workplace, and every street across America. The victories of the past were monumental, but the journey toward true equality is ongoing. Every voice matters, every action counts, and every generation has a responsibility to push forward. The question is no longer just about what has been achieved, it is about what remains to be done. Are we willing to confront the inequalities that persist? Are we ready to stand up, speak out, and demand real change? The legacy of those who came before us is a torch, and it is now in our hands to carry it forward. Change is possible, but only if we act. Only if we refuse to settle for half measures and empty promises. Only if we dare to imagine a world where justice, opportunity, and dignity are not privileges but rights for all. The dream of the civil rights movement was never meant to end in the past. It lives in the choices we make today and in the future we build together.